Hi everyone, so welcome to your first presentation. I'm going to share my screen. Right, so this is from your Learning How to Learn course, and the topic is Memory, Metaphors, and Lifelong Learning. So we are just going to focus on memory for this particular presentation. Um, so we're going to look at what is memory and how it functions. All right. Memory is the brain's ability to encode, store, and retrieve information. It allows us to learn from experience, recognize people and places, recall facts, and build a sense of personal identity over time. So, it helps you to store uh, events, okay, store what has happened to you in the form of experiences. It helps you to store that, which then allows you to identify um, those those events, those people, those places when they recur again in the future. Okay, so that is how memory functions. It stores as well as helps retrieve that particular information. Encoding is the first stage. So, sensory information such as sights, sounds, and emotions, etc., they are transformed into a form that the brain can store and process. Okay, so that is also very significant. The sensory information is transformed into is transformed and then stored in the brain. Of course, I'm not going to go into the biology of it, but there is a certain way in which brain processes information, and then neurons function to you know convert physical stimuli into uh, electric impulses. Okay, so those are the ways in which encoding works. Attention and meaning making strongly influence how well something is encoded, so that is also important. Like, for example, you get to see how you get to look at the way in which you give attention to an event. Okay, the way in which you process an event, that also affects the way in which memory is stored in your brain. Okay, so if you do not give much time to processing an information, okay, then it becomes a lack of attention on part of the person, on part of the subject, and that affects the way in which memory gets stored in the brain. Okay, so you might meet a person, and then you might have a conversation with the person, and then if you're not paying attention, if you meet the person again later, you will find that you're unable to recognize that person. So that is actually attributed to the way in which attention works and the way in which memory gets encoded in the brain. Okay, so next you have how storage occurs in different systems. All right, so how does storage function? So first you have sensory memory, okay, which is very brief. All right, it holds raw sensory input, so that is important to take into account. Sensory memory is basically, the way in which somehow you prick yourself in on a needle, or as a hot iron touches you. All right, so that is sensory memory. Okay, it's raw sensory input. It is very brief, and then you remember that the iron is hot. All right, so that is how sensory memory works. Then you have working memory, short term working memory, which holds information temporarily. All right, so short term memory functions by storing information temporarily. So someone gives you their phone number, okay, and you can remember that for maybe 10 minutes, 15 minutes, at best half an hour, if you have really good retention skills. But after that you find that you forget the phone number. All right, so that is how short-term memory functions. All right, then you have long-term memory. All right, so long-term memory is the way in which the brain stores events, experiences for a long time. All right, so potentially unlimited capacity and duration. It is said that the brain has potentially unlimited capacity and duration for long-term memory. Okay, it is divided into conscious facts and events, and implicit unconscious skills, habits, and conditioning. Okay, so that is very important to take into account. All right, next you have the concept of retrieval. So, retrieval is the process of accessing stored information. All right, so memory store, your brain stores the memory, and then there's a way in which you retrieve it back. Okay, so like I said, if you try to recall, you memorize a phone number, and then you have to retrieve the memory of the phone number. Okay, so that is also an important kind of an important function that the brain does. It retrieves that information. It can be triggered by cues. Okay, recognition is easier than recall, context, emotion, or associations. Retrieval strength depends on how well the memory was originally encoded and how frequently it has been recalled. So if you take into account the work that you do, the study that you do, so there's some memories that you're able to recall better. Okay, some subjects you're able to recall better, so that means that that subject has been better encoded inside your mind. All right, and later you might find that um, uh, later you might find that it is easier for you to recall that particular subject. Okay, the memory of that particular subject. So that is that is because that memory has been better encoded, which is why the retrieval strength works better in that particular memory. So you find that some subjects you're better able to revise. Okay, so it is actually part of how memory functions in that particular case. Okay, so that is important to take into account. Um, and next, you have the idea of memory being reconstructive. All right. So, again, very, very significant. Memory is not something that works by, completely reproducing something like a video reel. Okay. So, if you meet somebody at a particular place, okay, you will not be able to recall immediately. If you kind of think about that event maybe 2 or 3 days later, you will not be able to recall what that person was wearing. Okay, if it was a very important meeting, maybe you would be able to recall, but you will not be able to recall who were the other people around. Okay, whether birds were singing. All right, so those kind of things. So memory is actually reconstructive. You actually reconstruct it back again. Okay, each time you remember something, the brain is actively rebuilding the memory. Okay, which is why there might be certain gaps or breaks in the reconstruction of the memory. Okay, it might not get rebuilt completely. It might be just it might not be rebuilt completely in the exact form of what had happened. Okay, or it might not give you a picture perfect portrait of the person that you had met. Okay, it will be partially rebuilt. All right, because the brain is actually trying to reconstruct based on the information that it has encoded. All right, so that is important to take into account. Okay, which so each time we remember something, the brain actively rebuilds the memory, which can introduce errors, distortions, or even false memories over time. Okay, so false memories can get introduced at any given point of time. That also happens. Okay, so you might have seen something. Okay, you might have seen something in a movie, or you might have seen something, or somebody might have told you something with regards to an event, and then later you find that those memories become part of your own life. Okay, and you're unable to distinguish between the real and the unreal. All right, so that is also very significant to take into account. False memories do come into play. Okay, so important to understand that. And then memories are also influenced by current beliefs, emotions, and new information. All right. So you might have a memory of a person as being a good person. Okay. But later, when some additional information comes to you about how that person actually is, then you might find that it is difficult for you to actually think about that person as a good person. Okay, so memories are always influenced by current beliefs, emotions, and new information. Okay, and if you are really happy, you might actually again start to think that, okay, that person was actually a good person. Okay, so memories are always dynamic, they're never static, they're never fixed. So they're always subject to your moods, the way in which you remember an event, the way in which you reconstruct an event. So memories are always dynamic and they are not fixed. So that is an important thing to understand as well. And then we will find that there are ways of looking at long term memory. Okay, so we'll just go over the ways in which you can think about long term memory. So, long term memory is the brain's system for storing information over extended periods, all right, potentially for a lifetime, unlike short term or working memory, which only holds information temporarily. Okay, so that is also important to take note of. One second. Just, um, so we will go back to the screen share. Okay. Just ordering one particular slide. Um, okay. So you find that it has a virtually unlimited capacity and duration. All right. So unlike short-term memory's limited space, okay, 7 to 2 items, and brief duration, that is between 20 to 30 seconds, long-term memory can theoretically store vast amounts of information indefinitely. All right. So that is important to consider. And then you have long term memory, which is divided into two major types. You have the explicit or the declarative memory. Okay, conscious memories that we can recall and describe, including episodic memory, which includes personal experiences and events. Okay, and then you have semantic memory, all right, which includes general facts and knowledge. All right. So, for example, capital of a country. All right. So, those are the kinds of things that form semantic memory. Semantic memory associated with meaning. Okay. Episodic memory, as in, what has happened in your life in terms of events and experiences. And declarative memory or explicit memory, which includes conscious memories, that you can recall easily and describe. And next, you have implicit memory or non declarative memory. Okay, unconscious memories that influence behavior without awareness, including procedural memory, okay, skills and habits, for example, swimming, okay, riding a scooter or a bike. All right, and then you have priming, conditioning, and emotional responses. So there are ways in which you respond to your memories. All right, so it's important to consider it. Now we will just take a brief look at how memory functions, okay, and which parts of your brain stores the memories. So if you take a look at the diagram, you find that you know major regions involved in memory functions are displayed. So you follow the cursor. This is the hippocampus. Okay, the initial information and consolidation of declarative memories. So declarative memories, the ones that are explicit, okay, are stored in the hippocampus. Next, you have the amygdala, all right, which has the emotional aspects of the memories. Okay, so you remember, for example, if you're talking to a person on the phone, and if you're eating something at the same time, so that next time you eat that same thing, you will be able to recall, the person that you were talking to. All right, so that is how amygdala works. That is given, that is given the fact that you are eating something nice, or it's or the fact that you have access to foods of your choice. So that is amygdala. Emotional aspects of your memory are stored in that region. Next, you have the prefrontal cortex, okay, which is a working memory, which consists of the working memory and retrieval of memories. All right, so working memories consist of everyday memories, okay, memories that you function with, okay, where you're going, who are the people that you talk to, okay, on a daily basis. So that is part of your working memory. And neocortex is long-term storage of consolidated memory. So like events that have happened in your childhood, things that yeah, things from a long time ago, those are stored in the neocortex. All right, so this particular region is the neocortex. All right, sorry, this particular region is the neocortex, and that is what stores your long-term memories. And next, you have the cerebellum, which is at the back of the brain, okay, which involves procedural skills. All right, so writing, okay, that is part of your cerebellum. All right, so in case like somebody hits you at the back of your neck in a bar fight or something like that, then you will necessarily lose your writing abilities. But hopefully, but some you are able to kind of recall it more or less often enough. So that is the way in which your cerebellum functions. And next, we will look at how long-term memory works. So I have just summarized it all. Okay, so you have hippocampus, which consists of declarative memories, amygdala, which consists of emotional aspects, prefrontal cortex, which is the working memory and retrieval. Next, you have the neocortex, which consists of long term storage of consolidated memories. And then you have the cerebellum, which involves procedural skills. Okay, so that is all the information that you need basically about how memory is stored and how you retrieve memory. Okay, so very, very significant. Take the diagrams into account. Um, and um, so we will continue with the other points. Okay. Um, right. So next, you have information reaches long-term memory through effective encoding. Okay, so again, very important to look at it. Strong attention, emotional significance, meaningful associations, repetition, and elaboration all help transfer information from short term to long term storage, a process which is called consolidation. So, that is very significant to take note of. All right. Um, Hi, everybody. So, we are just going to look at the how long-term memory functions. So I'm just going to show you one of the diagrams. All right. So, you know, we have looked at explicit memory storage, which is stored in the hippocampus. Okay. And then we have looked at implicit memory storage, which is stored in the cerebellum. Okay. For skills and emotional conditioning and all of that. And next, you have this particular diagram, showing the cellular mechanism behind long-term memory storage. Synaptic plasticity, okay, LTP, that is long-term potentiation, involving changes at synapses, calcium signaling, protein synthesis, and structural modifications in dendritic spine. All right. So important to take that into account. So we are going to look at how it functions. So let us go back to the slides. So here you have a step-by-step sketch of long-term potentiation at the synapse level. All right. So the molecular basis of how repeated activity strengthens connections, forming the physical substrate for long-term memory storage. These visuals collectively show the two-phase process. Okay. So this is, the dendrites, all right, and particularly these are the synapses between two dendrites, okay, and you have um, you know the hippocampus and related limbic structures being crucial for forming and consolidating new long-term memories. All right. So particularly um, yes, so we are going to talk a little bit more on memory. Okay, so we have already looked at how memory is converted into signals. So we will actually go and look at it. This is the diagram that I want you to remember. Okay, synapses are the gaps between two dendrites. Okay, dendrites are part of neurons. All right. Memory begins with electrical activity in neurons. Okay, so experiences are converted into electrical signals, as I said. So when you experience something new, okay, neurons in relevant brain regions fire electrical impulses. All right, these signals travel down the axon of a neuron towards the synapse. Okay, the tiny gap between two neurons. Okay, so it travels down the axon and towards the synapse, which is the gap between the two neurons. And then electrical signals trigger the release of chemical neurotransmitters. Okay, so when the action potential reaches the presynaptic terminal, it causes voltage gated calcium channels to open. Calcium ions run into the terminal, triggering vesicles filled with neurotransmitters, okay, such as glutamate, to fuse with the cell membrane and release their contents into the synaptic cleft. So, all of it is not very important for us to kind of remember, but this is basically how it functions. Okay, so important to take that into account. Um, the released neurotransmitters diffuse across the synaptic cleft and bind to specific receptors on the receiving neuron's membrane. For memory formation, the most important are AMPA and NMDA receptors, both glutamate receptors. Binding opens ion channels, allowing sodium and calcium ions to flow into the postsynaptic neuron, creating a local electrical change called an excitatory postsynaptic potential. Okay, so important to take all of it into account. Right. So we'll just, that is how we have looked at the biological function of memory. Just one other thing that I want you to take note of. So memories in long-term storage are not static. Okay, so that is important to remember. They are reconstructive. Each time a memory is retrieved, it is actively rebuilt and can be altered, strengthened, weakened, or even distorted by new information, emotions, or context, which explains why memories can change over time or become inaccurate. Okay, so that is also very significant. Memories can be um, memories are dynamic, like I said, and they are always reconstructed by the brain when it is trying to retrieve something. Okay, so it is actively rebuilt and reshaped and redone almost. Okay. And it explains why memories can change over time. Memories can change over time and then become inaccurate as well. Okay, so that's important. Depends on your mood, what you ate on one particular day, where you are. If you're in an uncomfortable situation, you'll recall something in an unfavorable manner. So all of those things are very significant. Now we will look at short-term memory. Okay, short-term memory is a temporary storage system that holds a limited amount of information for a very brief period, usually just seconds to about 30 seconds, allowing you to keep information actively in mind while you are using that particular information. Okay, so it has a very limited capacity, typically 7 to 2 items. All right, so for example, phone numbers are always 10 digits, okay, because your brain can't really remember beyond 10 digits. All right, so that is why phone numbers are always of 10 digits. Meaning, as in, at one go, it cannot remember beyond 10 digits. So, meaning most people can hold about 5 to 9 chunks of information at once, for example, phone number or a short list. All right, information in short term memory is fragile and quickly lost unless it is actively maintained through rehearsal, repeating it silently or aloud, or quickly transferred to long term memory via deeper processing. Short term memory is closely linked to working memory, a more dynamic concept that includes not just passive storage but also active manipulation of information, for example, mental arithmetic, following directions, or understanding a sentence while reading it, etc. All right, so all of these things rely heavily on attention and focus. Distractions, new incoming information, or interference from similar items can easily displace or overwrite what is currently being held in short term memory, which is why we often forget a name or number moments after hearing it if we don't pay close attention. So exactly, like short term memory, like if you're given a phone number, you have to like process it and then store it, and it takes some time for memory to like store things in your in this particular region. What is it? The neocortex. All right, so it takes time for short-term memory to be converted into long-term memory. All right, so if you are learning the piano, for example, and you start practicing it, you know, and you start learning the chords, then after a while, okay, after maybe like 1 day or 2 days, you find something difficult to do and you keep practicing it and you keep making mistakes, but after maybe 2 or 3 days you come back to it again and you find that you're able to play it better. Okay, it happens with me, and I've read that this is the case with a lot of people as well. It's because your short-term memory gets converted into your long-term memory. Okay, so I always anyway, I'm just kind of mentioning it just to kind of keep help you understand how short-term memory gets converted into long-term memory. So I think the other thing to kind of remember is how memories are how the study of memory and memory functions is applicable to culture, to the study of culture, to the world around us, to the study of politics, to the study of like I said, events, trauma caused by events. All right, so all of that comes under the study of memory function. So let's look at what are the applicabilities of memory functions. So first you have collective or cultural memory, which is socially constructed. Okay, so drawing heavily on Morris Holbach's collective memory, and later Jan and Alida Assmann's cultural memory, critical theorists view memory not as neutral recollection but as a socially mediated process shaped by institutions, rituals, media, and power relations. Okay, so very significant again. The way in which a culture remembers something, that has to do with that has to do with political parties in power, that has to do with how events are represented by the media. All right, so all of those events, because you are now starting to think about memory as a collective phenomenon, not just a personal phenomenon, okay, but a collective phenomenon, how a group of people remember things. All right, so that is how we look at memory. Memory becomes a tool for creating group identity while excluding or marginalizing other narratives. All right, so again, very significant. Memory, memory becomes a way of creating group identity, all right, while excluding or marginalizing other narratives. So for example, if you think about your own ethnic community, ethnic or racial community, all right, and that kind of that kind of thinking um, necessarily marginalizes other groups, other ethnicities, other races, all right. So that is important as well. So memory, functions to help consolidate a particular kind of group identity, which can then either support an alternative group identity, or it can marginalize that group identity. And you have seen that occur in during colonization as well, all right. So you have one particular group identity which is seen as the superior form of group identity, all right, which is the white race, okay, and particularly that has dominated the non-white race for a very long time, okay, and effects of that continue till the present day. So that is how memory actually functions to create group identities, which necessarily always includes marginalizing the other. Okay, so important to take that into account. Next, you have aspects such as trauma, violence, and politics of memory. Okay, so influenced by Freud, thinkers such as Freud, Kathy Carroth, okay, Marianne Hirsch, who argues about post memory. Critical theory examines how traumatic events such as holocausts, okay, colonially induced famines, all right, genocide, okay, such as the ongoing genocide in Palestine, dictatorships, colonialisms, all of them are remembered or silenced. Okay, so again, very, very significant. Memory, the way in which we process memory, is not simply applicable to our everyday events, but they are applicable to global events. Okay, so again, very significant to remember. Okay, it's not just our individual experiences that memory if memory has an influence on. Memory is actually influencing the way in which the world community remembers global events. Okay, the world community memorializes global events. So all of that very, very significant. And largely, if you look at the ways in which colonial violence has perpetrated itself over and over again in various forms. For example, you have the colonially induced forms of violence. Okay, so Ireland was affected by it between 1845 1852. India was affected by it. Okay, and you find that post-colonial governments take recourse to colonial measures to enact certain forms of coercion over the population. So you find that during the civil war in 1980s in Ethiopia, you have the same principle of colonially of the colonially induced famine being brought back into that state. All right, so very significant that as a collective, uh, we are unable to kind of really hold on to the lessons of history. All right, so very significant to take it into account. Okay, so memory and how it is remembered and silenced becomes important in the way in which we understand history. Okay, so very significant to take it into account. Trauma is frequently framed as a disruptive force, all right, that resists easy narrative closure, while collective trauma can be mobilized politically or therapeutically. Okay, so that is also very significant to take note of. So I think we can conclude our first presentation over here, and then the next presentation we will continue with the same topic, but we will look at certain other ideas. So thank you very much for listening.